The thing about civilized galactic society, and yes, that's civilized doing some absolutely Herculean lifting here, is that everyone had agreed, roughly 12,000 standard cycles ago, that overt violence was terribly gauche. Barbaric, even. The sort of thing primitive species did before they discovered the joys of passive-aggressive trade embargoes and strongly worded diplomatic memorandums. The Xie-Yi Accords, as they were pretentiously named by species who'd never bothered learning what actual ancient Earth Chinese sounded like, established a beautiful principle. Conflicts would be resolved through dialogue, arbitration, and the occasional theatrical posturing that made everyone feel important without actually spilling anyone's equivalent of blood. And to ensure nobody got any uncivilized ideas, every major station, vessel, and settlement was equipped with monitoring systems so comprehensive that a Brevix couldn't scratch its third thorax without 17 different agencies knowing about it. These weren't your primitive surveillance cameras either. Oh no. The Quillarian Mark VII observation matrix could track molecular signatures through 14 different dimensional phases, record conversations in 8,000 languages simultaneously, and, according to the marketing brochure that absolutely nobody had read, ensure transparent accountability across all civilized interactions. The galaxy had, essentially, turned itself into the universe's most elaborate reality show. Except instead of voting people off the station, you filed complaints with the Interspecies Mediation Council and waited 6 to 8 standard months for a response. It worked remarkably well, actually. When everyone knows they're being watched, people tend to behave. Or at least, they behave in ways that won't look terrible when played back during arbitration hearings. Humanity had joined this magnificent circus roughly 40 standard cycles ago, emerging from their little blue marble with all the enthusiasm of a species that had just discovered there were neighbors, and oh God, the neighbors had been watching Earth's entire violent history with what could only be described as horrified fascination. The galactic community had welcomed humans with the same energy one might welcome a newly house-trained pet. Plenty of head pats, lots of "isn't that adorable" comments, and a general assumption that Earth's primates would eventually learn to stop breaking things. To humanity's credit, they'd been remarkably well behaved. Polite, even. They'd signed all the appropriate treaties, established embassies on 17 major worlds, and generally conducted themselves with the kind of restrained professionalism that made the galaxy collectively sigh with relief. Sure, humans had a reputation for being a bit fragile. Their squishy bodies required very specific atmospheric conditions. They couldn't regenerate limbs like the Zenthi. And they had an unfortunate tendency to die if you looked at them wrong. But they were trying so very hard to fit in, which brought us to Research Station Kava 7, a mid-sized facility orbiting a thoroughly unremarkable gas giant in the Tertius sector, where approximately 800 beings from 42 different species conducted the kind of cutting-edge scientific research that sounded impressive at funding meetings, but mostly involved staring at screens and arguing about decimal points. Vera Kozlowski had been assigned to Kava 7 for the past 18 standard months as Earth's xenobotanical liaison, which was a fancy way of saying she made sure the 14 humans on station didn't accidentally poison themselves with alien vegetation and occasionally attended meetings where various species argued about plant classification systems with the kind of intensity usually reserved for territorial wars. She was, by most accounts, utterly unremarkable. Average height for a human at 167 centimeters, dark hair usually pulled back in a practical bun, brown eyes that suggested mild interest in whatever conversation was happening, and a wardrobe consisting entirely of the beige jumpsuits that Earth's diplomatic corps had decided made humans look approachable and non-threatening. She spoke 4 galactic common languages with what her instructors had generously called adequate competency. maintained a small quarters in Section 7 Delta that she decorated with exactly 3 personal items, and had never filed a single complaint or incident report. The other species on Kava 7 found her pleasant enough. The Breviks thought she was adorable in the way one finds small, harmless creatures adorable. The Zenthi appreciated her punctuality. The Quillarians had stopped noticing her entirely after the first month, which was their version of acceptance. She existed in that perfect sweet spot of being visible enough to fulfill her duties, but invisible enough that nobody really thought about her much, which made her the perfect person to overhear something she absolutely wasn't supposed to. The cultivation bay in Section 4 was Vera's favorite part of the station. A massive hydroponic garden where dozens of species grew their home vegetation, partly for research and partly because everyone got homesick sometimes, even beings with crystalline neural structures. She'd developed a routine of spending her off-duty hours there, maintaining Earth's modest contribution of tomatoes, basil, and a single stubborn orchid that refused to bloom despite 18 months of careful attention. On this particular station cycle, she'd arrived earlier than usual, somewhere around the 3rd shift when most of the station's population was either sleeping or pretending to work while actually watching entertainment feeds from their home worlds. The bay was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. 3 voices carried across the humid air, speaking in Zenthi Prime, which was unfortunate for them, because Vera had spent 6 months on Zenthos during her training and had become reasonably fluent out of sheer stubborn boredom. The translation implant behind her ear was actually unnecessary. But she'd learned early in her diplomatic career that letting people think you couldn't understand them led to all sorts of interesting conversations. Ridiculous that we're even having this discussion, the first voice was saying. She recognized it. Krellick, senior researcher in the Xenomineralogy department. A Zenthi with the kind of prestigious family connections that made him insufferable at social functions. The deposits in Sector 47 Gamma are clearly within our surveyed territory. Your surveyed territory, came the second voice. Thex, a Breviks trade coordinator with a gambling problem and a chip on all 6 of his shoulders. Funny how that survey happened exactly 3 cycles after our initial exploratory mission to the region. The third voice was new, or at least unfamiliar. Deep, resonant, with the kind of harmonics that suggested a Quillarian. The Mediation Council will rule in favor of whichever species files the most comprehensive brief. This is known. What isn't known is whether certain inconvenient data points will make it into those briefs. Vera had frozen halfway to her tomato plants, processing what she was hearing. Sector 47 Gamma had been all over the station's gossip network for the past few weeks. A region of space where preliminary scans suggested massive deposits of thoraxite, a mineral that was both rare and stupidly valuable. 3 species had claimed discovery rights, which meant 3 species were about to spend the next decade in arbitration hearings unless something changed. You're suggesting we alter survey data? Krellick's voice carried a note of scandalized delight. That would violate approximately 47 different sections of the Cooperative Research Accords. I'm suggesting, the Quillarian said smoothly, that data can be interpreted, and certain interpretations are more favorable than others. The issue is the human observation team that was present during our initial surveys. Their recordings are annoyingly comprehensive. Vera's blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the bay's temperature controls. The human team submitted their findings to Earth's database. Thex said, "Standard protocol." "Earth's database," the Quillarian replied, "which we can't access without triggering approximately 900 diplomatic alarms. However, if the humans who conducted the survey were to revise Their findings, based on new information, well, that would be their professional judgment, wouldn't it? And if they refused to revise? Krellick asked. The pause that followed was heavy enough to have its own gravitational field. There are 8 humans on Kava 7, the Quillarian said finally. Most are non-essential personnel. If one were to have an unfortunate accident, nothing fatal. Humans are so fragile that even minor incidents require extensive medical intervention and station leave. It would send a message. The right message. Especially if that human happened to be connected to the xenobotanical department, which interfaces regularly with the survey teams. Vera's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. They were talking about her. They had to be. She was the only xenobotanical liaison, and she'd helped coordinate supplies for the 47 Gamma survey team. You're proposing we assault a human? Thex sounded genuinely shocked, which would have been touching if he wasn't actively participating in this conversation. The monitoring systems have been experiencing maintenance issues in several sections of the station. The Quillarian interrupted. Purely coincidental technical difficulties. The cultivation bay, for instance, has been scheduled for matrix recalibration. If something were to happen during that recalibration window, well, there might be gaps in the recording. This is insane, Krellick said. But his tone suggested he was trying the idea on for size rather than rejecting it outright. This is pragmatic, the Quillarian corrected. Humans are new to galactic society. They're still learning how things work. A gentle reminder about the importance of flexibility in scientific interpretation, delivered through unofficial channels, will save everyone years of tedious arbitration. And if the reminder is delivered in a way that doesn't appear on official monitoring systems, even better. Plausible deniability all around. Vera had exactly 3 seconds to decide what to do. She could continue listening and risk being discovered. She could leave immediately and pretend she'd never heard this conversation. Or she could. A tomato plant chose that moment to release one of its support vines with an audible snap. 3 alien heads turned in perfect synchronization. 3 sets of distinctly non-human eyes, focusing on the very human woman standing 15 meters away, with her hand still outstretched toward her gardening supplies. Ah, the Quillarian said. How convenient. Vera ran. She made it approximately 12 meters before Thex's manipulation field caught her ankle, sending her sprawling across the pathway between crop rows. The Breviks were known for their telekinetic abilities, and Thex had clearly been practicing. She hit the ground hard enough to see stars, felt something in her wrist crunch in a way that suggested her next few weeks were going to be extremely painful. Wait. Krellick's voice carried a note of panic. We were just talking. We don't actually have to. She heard everything, the Quillarian said flatly. And now she's seen us. What exactly do you propose? We ask her politely to forget this conversation happened? Vera was scrambling backward, her injured wrist screaming protest, when Krellick's armored form stepped into her path. The Zenthi were large creatures, bipedal but built like tanks, with carapaces that could shrug off small arms fire. He looked down at her with what might have been genuine regret. I'm sorry, he said. This wasn't personal. Funny, Vera gasped, still trying to put distance between herself and her attackers. It feels pretty personal from here. Thex's manipulation field grabbed her again, this time wrapping around her torso and lifting her off the ground. It felt like being squeezed by an invisible giant hand, pressure building against her ribs until breathing became a conscious effort. Don't kill her, the Quillarian said, still maddeningly calm. Injure, frighten, Make the point clear. But humans die so easily, and explaining a death would be complicated. The cameras, Krellick said, looking around nervously, are offline, the Quillarian confirmed. I checked. We have a 6-minute window. 6 minutes, Vera thought distantly, was a very long time to be at the mercy of people who decided you were a problem that needed solving. What happened next was methodical in a way that was almost worse than pure rage would have been. Thex's manipulation field slammed her into a support pillar. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact driving the air from her lungs. Something else cracked, a rib, maybe 2. Krellick stood guard, his massive form blocking any potential escape routes, while the Quillarian watched with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly interesting experiment. Earth needs to understand its place, the Quillarian said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather patterns instead of assault. You're children in a galaxy of adults. Children who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Vera tried to respond, but Thex's field tightened around her throat, cutting off whatever defiant response she'd been formulating. Black spots danced across her vision. This was it, she realized with a strange clarity. They'd miscalculated. Humans might die easily, but apparently these 3 had forgotten just how easily. Then, just as abruptly, the field released her. She hit the ground in a heap, gasping for air, every nerve ending screaming. Through the haze of pain, she heard Krellick say, "That's enough. Any more and we risk." She gets the message, the Quillarian agreed. Don't you, human? Vera didn't respond. Couldn't respond. She focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on memorizing every detail of their faces because some primitive part of her brain insisted that survival meant bearing witness. When you're recovered, the Quillarian continued, you'll contact your survey team colleagues. You'll explain that there may have been errors in the initial 47 gamma data. You'll recommend a review with revised interpretations. Do you understand? Vera managed a nod that might have looked like agreement or might have just been her head lolling forward. Excellent, the Quillarian said. Remember, this was an accident. You fell while tending to your plants. The monitoring systems were offline for maintenance. No one will believe otherwise. Earth is so very far away, and you're just one liaison among hundreds. Who's going to care? They left her there, crumpled among the tomato plants, bleeding internally and externally, with at least 3 broken bones and the kind of injuries that would require weeks of medical intervention. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd been so very clever about their timing and their technical sabotage, was that the Quillarian Mark VII observation matrix was actually redundant by design. When the primary systems went offline, secondary systems kicked in automatically. And when secondary systems were compromised, tertiary monitoring protocols activated. And tertiary monitoring, as it happened, wasn't routed through Kava 7's local network. It transmitted directly to the Interspecies Mediation Council's central archives as a failsafe against exactly this kind of technical malfunction. Somewhere in a data center 3 sectors away, every moment of Vera Kozlowski's assault was being recorded in 8,000 simultaneous translations, tagged with priority flags, and queued for immediate review. But the really unfortunate part, unfortunate for Krellick, Thex, and their Quillarian associate anyway, was that tertiary monitoring also transmitted to each species' home system as a courtesy notification of potential treaty violations, which meant that even as Vera lay bleeding among her tomato plants, a compressed data package was racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds, carrying video evidence of 3 aliens methodically beating a human diplomat while the cameras were malfunctioning, The message reached Earth's diplomatic command approximately 47 minutes after the attack ended. The response was immediate, though not in ways the galactic community had learned to recognize as dangerous. Earth's official statement, released through proper channels within 90 minutes, was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. It expressed grave concern regarding alleged injuries sustained by one of Earth's representatives. It requested full cooperation from station authorities in investigating the incident. It noted, with the kind of politeness that should have been a warning sign, that Earth was dispatching medical personnel to ensure proper care for its citizen. What the statement didn't mention was that the medical personnel were arriving aboard the UESS Vigilant, a deep space cruiser that Earth's military had insisted was purely defensive in nature, despite being armed with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. Or that the Vigilant was being accompanied by 3 support vessels that were definitely not packed with Marines in powered armor. Or that 6 other human military vessels had quietly begun routine repositioning maneuvers that would place them within striking distance of Kava 7 within 72 hours. Earth's diplomatic corps had learned something during humanity's first 4 decades in galactic society. The other species saw humans as fragile, emotional primitives. Useful to maintain that image right up until the moment you needed to demonstrate that fragile didn't mean helpless, and emotional didn't mean irrational. Aboard Kava 7, word spread through human channels faster than it did through official communication networks. Within 3 hours, every human on the station knew what had happened to Vera. Within 6 hours, humans working on 17 other stations and planetary outposts had seen the footage. Because tertiary monitoring wasn't subject to the same privacy restrictions as primary systems. And someone in Earth's intelligence apparatus had decided that full transparency was appropriate in this situation. The atmosphere on Kava 7 changed in ways that the non-human inhabitants initially failed to recognize. The humans kept showing up for their shifts. They remained polite in interactions. They filed their reports and attended their meetings and maintained perfect professional decorum. But they stopped smiling, stopped making small talk, stopped laughing at jokes or participating in the casual social exchanges that had made them seem so approachable for 18 months. The Breivik in administration noticed that the human technicians who usually helped troubleshoot computer problems were suddenly too busy to assist. The Zenthi in the Xenomineralogy department found that their human colleagues had become unavailable for consultations. The Quillarians discovered that humans had stopped attending interdepartmental social functions entirely. It was subtle, isolating, and deeply, profoundly unsettling in ways that became apparent only gradually. Krellick first realized something had gone catastrophically wrong when he tried to access his personal data files and discovered they'd been locked by station security. When he demanded an explanation, the human IT administrator, a pleasant man named Marcus Chen, who had always been helpful before, looked at him with eyes like frozen carbon and said, "Security review, standard procedure, no timeline for resolution." Thex found his trade accounts frozen pending routine audits that somehow only affected his transactions. His quarters were searched twice in 8 hours for contraband scanning that found nothing but left everything slightly disarranged in a way that screamed deliberate intimidation. The Quillarian, whose name turned out to be Vexthal, which was somehow too perfect, discovered that his research proposals had been rejected by 7 different review boards simultaneously, each citing different technical violations of protocols he'd never heard of. None of it was technically illegal. All of it was technically justified. And all of it was happening while human personnel maintained perfect professional courtesy and absolute emotional detachment. By the time the Vigilant arrived, 48 hours after the attack, Kava 7's entire administrative structure had realized they had a problem. A human-shaped problem, specifically, and one that was operating entirely within legal parameters while making everyone involved in Vera's assault profoundly uncomfortable. The Vigilant docked with the kind of precision that suggested its crew had practiced combat insertions more than peaceful medical evacuations. The medical personnel who disembarked included 2 actual doctors and 30 individuals whose body language suggested significantly more combat training than was typical for healthcare workers. They collected Vera from the station's medical bay, where she'd spent 2 days in a regeneration tank healing broken bones and internal bleeding. She was conscious, mobile, and according to the medical reports, would recover fully within 6 standard weeks. The lead doctor, a woman with colonel's insignia visible on her uniform collar, conducted a brief examination, confirmed the medical reports were accurate, and then requested a meeting with station administration to discuss the incident. The meeting was attended by Kava 7's station commander, a Zenthi named Voraltesh, who'd been in his position for 12 cycles and had never dealt with anything more dramatic than cargo scheduling disputes. Also present were Krelik, Thex, and Vexthal, each of whom had been advised by the Interspecies Mediation Council's legal representatives that their presence was mandatory. The colonel, her name was Diana Rodriguez, and her service record included 3 classified operations that had made the Zenthi Diplomatic Corps reconsider some assumptions about human military capabilities. Began the meeting by playing the tertiary monitoring footage, all 6 minutes of it, in high definition, with real-time biometric data showing Vera's escalating injuries. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez said when the footage ended, using the human term that her translator rendered as something like, "individuals of various physiological configurations to whom I'm extending courtesy you don't deserve. We have a problem." Vexthal attempted to speak. Rodriguez raised one hand in a gesture that transcended species barriers. "Shut up." "The problem," she continued, "is that 3 individuals aboard this station engaged in premeditated assault against a human diplomat. Not a misunderstanding, not an accident. Premeditated conspiracy to commit assault, captured on monitoring systems that you believed you'd successfully sabotaged." "The cameras were malfunctioning," Vexthal tried. "The primary cameras were malfunctioning," Rodriguez corrected. "Due to tampering that we've now traced back to your personal access codes. The tertiary systems functioned perfectly, as designed. As you would have known if you'd actually read the technical specifications instead of skimming the marketing materials. Station Commander Voraltesh looked like he wanted to spontaneously evolve the ability to teleport to another dimension. Colonel Rodriguez, I assure you this station does not condone." "With respect, Commander, I don't care what this station condones. I care about what happened to my citizen." Rodriguez leaned forward, and something in her posture made 3 apex predator species flinch. "Here's what happens next. These 3 individuals will be remanded to Interspecies Mediation Council custody pending formal charges. Earth is filing complaints under 17 different treaty provisions. The investigation will be comprehensive, transparent, and conducted by parties who don't have vested interests in Sector 47 Gamma mineral rights. You can't simply..." Krelik began. "We can," Rodriguez interrupted. "And we are. Because here's what you brilliant individuals failed to understand about humans. We're really good at following rules right up until someone hurts one of ours. Then we become incredibly creative about using those same rules as weapons." She stood, and the 30 medical personnel shifted slightly in a way that suggested they were very prepared to be extremely helpful if anyone objected to Earth's proposed course of action. "Vera Kozlowski will recover," Rodriguez continued. But you three? You're going to become a case study in why you don't touch human diplomats. Earth is going to prosecute this so thoroughly that every species in the galaxy will know exactly what happens when someone thinks they can intimidate us. It was just supposed to send a message, Thex said quietly, sounding genuinely confused about how things had escalated so dramatically. Rodriguez's smile was colder than vacuum. Oh, a message was sent. Just not the one you intended. The legal proceedings took 8 standard months, which was actually remarkably fast by galactic standards. The evidence was so comprehensive that even the most expensive legal advocates couldn't construct plausible deniability. Tertiary monitoring footage didn't lie, and the biometric data confirmed every impact, every injury, every moment of the assault. Krellick received a 30-cycle ban from interspecies research positions and a fine that would consume most of his family's wealth. Thex lost his trade license permanently and faced criminal charges on his homeworld. Vex Thal, as the primary instigator, received the harshest sentence. 60 cycles in a multi-species correctional facility and permanent removal from diplomatic circles. But the real punishment was the publicity. Earth made sure every species in the galaxy saw the footage. Not as revenge, that would have been uncivilized, but as education, a comprehensive demonstration of what happened when you assumed humans were too fragile, too new, too inconsequential to matter. The galactic community learned several important lessons from the Kava 7 incident as it came to be known. First, that human fragility was a physical characteristic, not a psychological one. Humans could be hurt easily, but they healed, and they remembered, and they were vindictive in the most legally compliant ways imaginable. Second, that Earth's military might have seemed modest compared to older civilizations, but humans had been innovating in violence for their entire evolutionary history. The Vigilant and its support vessels? That was Earth being restrained. Rumors suggested the ships that hadn't deployed carried significantly nastier hardware. Third, and most importantly, that humans valued their people with an intensity that bordered on irrational. You could insult human culture, criticize human policy, even engage in aggressive economic competition with human interests. But if you hurt a human, if you made one of their citizens bleed while thinking you could hide behind technical malfunctions and plausible deniability, then you discovered that humans had been playing by the galactic community's civilized rules only because they'd chosen to, not because they had to. Vera recovered fully, as predicted. She spent 6 weeks in medical rehabilitation on Earth, surrounded by family and friends who treated her like a returning hero despite her protests that she'd mostly just gotten beat up and survived. When she returned to active duty, it was at a different posting, Earth's embassy on Xenthos Prime, with a promotion and a security detail that made diplomatic observers nervous. She never returned to Kava 7, though she maintained correspondence with Marcus Chen and the other humans who'd remained on the station. They'd become something of a legend among Earth's diplomatic corps. The team that had systematically made 3 aliens' lives miserable using nothing but official regulations and creative interpretation of standard procedures. Marcus had apparently kept a file of every rule they'd bent, every procedure they'd weaponized, titled, "How to Ruin Someone's Day While Maintaining Perfect Professionalism." Earth never officially admitted that the Vigilance deployment had been anything other than a medical evacuation. The 30 medical personnel returned to their regular duties without comment. The 6 support vessels completed their routine repositioning exercises and went about their business. But everyone in the galaxy understood the message. The real message. The one that didn't require cameras or monitoring systems or official statements. Touch a human diplomat, and you'll discover that Earth's restraint isn't weakness. It's a courtesy, one that can be revoked at any moment. The Sector 47 Gamma dispute was eventually resolved through proper arbitration channels. Surprisingly, the human survey team's original data, unrevised, comprehensive, and annoyingly accurate, became the foundation for the Mediation Council's ruling. The thorax site deposits were divided among 17 different species based on legitimate historical claims, and none of the 3 species who'd conspired against Vera received preferential treatment. Pure coincidence, of course. The Council insisted its ruling had nothing to do with recent events. Nobody believed them, but that was fine. The galaxy had learned to read between the lines. 5 cycles after the incident, a new protocol was added to the GAE Accords, the Kozlowski Amendment, which specified enhanced penalties for assaults against diplomatic personnel during monitoring system malfunctions, whether accidental or intentional. It passed with overwhelming support from species who wanted to make absolutely clear they understood the lesson. And in the cultivation bay of Kava 7, now operating under new management with significantly upgraded monitoring systems that had so much redundancy that system failures were mathematically impossible, Vera's tomato plants continued to thrive. One of the new human researchers had adopted them, tending them carefully, making sure they produced fruit. A small memorial, really. A reminder that seemed unnecessary until you remembered that sometimes the galaxy needed reminding about basic principles, like how civilized societies treat each other, like how monitoring systems exist for everyone's protection, like how you absolutely, positively, never assume the camera's malfunctioned unless you're prepared to discover that somewhere, somehow, one camera kept recording and everyone was watching.